Well, hello again, everyone, and welcome to Conversations with the Dean. I'm Turney Stevens, Dean of the College of Business at Lipscomb University, and I'm delighted today to welcome James P. Pinkerton from the Fox News Channel to Lipscomb University.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Well, Jim, we're delighted to have you, and here's an example of a guest who knows a lot more about television than I do, so perhaps you should do the questioning and I should answer. But we are delighted to have you, and it's obviously a privilege and an honor to have you on the Lipscomb campus. You're actually here tonight to address a dinner. I think it's the Don Elliott Endowed Lectureship, and you'll be doing that lecture tonight, and you're going to be talking about U.S. healthcare. Right. And that's something I think we're all concerned about. So let me just dive right in here. What's wrong with U.S. healthcare?
Well, the biggest problem is that we don't have cures for the major ailments confronting our society. We've got an epidemic of Alzheimer's in this country. We've got an epidemic of diabetes. We've got wounded warriors coming back, paralyzed, and they're kids of 19 or 20 and the rest of their lives in wheelchairs. And we're not addressing those public health epidemics the way we addressed past public health epidemics. 100 years ago in the South, malaria and yellow fever were real issues. Now, 100 years ago, they didn't exactly know how to treat it, but they did figure out it was mosquitoes somehow, so they drained swamps. Then in the 40s and 50s, people said we have, and that made it go away, and a lot of the economic development around here is a result from that. In the 40s and 50s, polio was a scourge, and in 1950, the government did a study and said that if polio continues as is from 1950 to the year 2000, it'll cost the U.S. government $100 billion a year in 2000. Now, the entire federal budget in 1950 was $44.5 billion. Now, if you adjust that $100 billion for inflation, you get a number closer to $1 trillion. But of course, as everybody knows, we don't have polio anymore because we did the vaccine in 1955. After 20 years of work and finally got to it. In the 50s and 60s, we also chose to do away with smallpox. And smallpox was not a big issue in America, but as late as 1967, 2 million people in India were dying of smallpox, and now the number is 0. There is no smallpox anywhere in the world unless maybe Al-Qaeda cooks some up somewhere, but as of now, nothing. In the 80s and 90s, we faced a major public health crisis with AIDS. Nobody knew what AIDS was in 1981. And by 1987, we had AZT, which was a decent treatment for AIDS. And by 1996, we had what they call the cocktail, which genuinely knocks back AIDS into the category of a manageable chronic condition, sort of like diabetes and so on, for everybody, at least in America. If you're conscious of your regimen and so on, you can live with AIDS. Magic Johnson just bought the Los Angeles Lakers for $2 billion. He's had AIDS for decades and is doing fine. So the biggest problem is that we have these extremely expensive diseases coming. Alzheimer's, for example, is a $172 billion a year hit on the U.S. economy, 2/3 of that being direct outlays from Medicare and Medicaid. So any politician comes and says, I'm going to solve the problems of Medicare and Medicaid, you're not going to do it. If people are, getting Alzheimer's, and that number, by the way, the 6 million people now costing $172 billion is going to quadruple as all of us baby boomers, age into that category ourselves.
Well, I think when we talk about issues with U.S. healthcare, generally the national conversation is about the coming cost of dealing with the care for baby boomers. I think we all know that there's this bulge in the population cycle, 10,000 people a day turning 65 for the next 19 years, I think, in this country. But you're saying, I think, if I hear you correctly, that it's not just about the diseases of the elderly, but it's also about some of the chronic diseases of poor health and poor health habits for the rest of the population, things like diabetes coming from obesity. And
there's also cancer. Cancer has 1.3 million cases a year, 600,000 deaths. And I guess my real point is that the political system has chosen to define healthcare, or what I think of medicine as healthcare finance. You go to Washington and the Republicans say we need the free market to do the healthcare system, and the Democrats say we're going to stick with the Affordable Care Act, or also known as Obamacare, and the entire discussion in Washington is over insurance. When you go to the doctor, when I go to the doctor, the first things out of our mouths when we meet the physician aren't, how do I pay for this? It's, I've got a lump, I've got a pain, I've got an ache, I've got something wrong with me, I'm worried about my children, my parents, whoever. It's a medical conversation. But the problem is that Washington and the public policy apparatus has said, when people say medicine, what they really mean is healthcare finance. Well, actually, no. When people say medicine, they mean medicine. You turn on a television set, and you see a dozen medical dramas on the air. Half the TV commercials are about, COPD or arthritis or weak bones or whatever it might be. And the political class has just chosen to misinterpret this, sort of a bait and switch on the country, saying, when you say healthcare is a crisis, when you say you're worried about your elderly parents, what's our real plan for you, Mr. and Mrs. Citizen, is when your parents or you yourself get Alzheimer's and dementia, we guarantee your choice. Democrats will say the government will take care of it, or the Republicans will say the free market will take care of it. The issue isn't the accounting and the financing of disease. The issue is the disease itself.
But you're saying it should be the financing.
No, I'm saying it should be the curing. I'm saying if you eliminate polio, you have zero polio expenses. All the efforts to rearrange the financing mechanism, if we're sitting around today in 2012 creating accountable care organizations and HMOs and patient-centered this and that and medical homes for people with polio, they still have polio.
So you're saying it's not a health care issue, it's a health issue.
Right. Yes, exactly.
We should figure out a way not only to cure the diseases that exist, but to prevent people from incurring those diseases.
I would go further and say we're not figuring out the cures of the diseases that exist. The number of new drugs approved by the FDA in the last 15 years has fallen 63%. The number of new medical devices has fallen 40%. The number of new antibiotics has fallen 80%.
So are we overregulated? Is it too difficult to get a drug approved?
It's too difficult to get a drug approved. The FDA is set up as a bureaucratic organization to say no. If you or I were the FDA commissioner and somebody said, look, here's your choice. You approve this drug and somebody drops dead the next day, you get crucified in Congress. You approve this drug and people have a better life 10 years from now, nobody cares. They'll never remember that you did it. So your incentive system at the FDA is to say no. The entire media cultural complex is all whistleblowers and so on. Now that's part of it. I also think that the FDA is under pressure from the rest of the federal government to cut costs. So for example, if Avastin, which is a breast cancer drug, comes along and people say, well, it's $80,000 for a drug that statistics say will keep women alive an extra 3 months. The FDA says no. Now, the reality, though, is that if you think about how progress occurs, the first prototype of anything is hideously expensive, and it gets cheaper with every iteration. Avastin 1.0 is expensive, it doesn't work very well. Avastin 2.0 might work a lot better, 3.0, or Avastin might be a complete dead end, who knows? But we then say, well, at least now we know that particular approach to dealing with cancer, trying to starve the blood vessels, doesn't work. In addition to the FDA, there are the trial lawyers. You turn on the television set and you get ads for 1-800-BAD-DRUG.
Well, let's say the FDA changed their culture, and let's say the FDA became focused on saying yes as opposed to saying no. A whole new generation of drugs flood into the marketplace, and then we find out after a few years when sufficient research is done, oh, wait, we've got a problem here. Gee, that arthritis drug that you've been taking, well, we didn't know it, but it's really causing cancer in a certain percentage of the people. So is that the culture that you think we should have?
No, because in that situation, the trial lawyers would annihilate the entire industry. They're already crushing it. I mean, they're already
which is why the FDA says no, because they're so cautious, right?
The FDA says no, but the point is that for the life of me, I can't understand why we have a system where the FDA approves a drug. They do their best faith effort to figure out whether it's good or bad, at least according to the law. And if a pharmaceutical company says, according to FDA rules, I have made this drug, then after that, you can find a jury of retired postal workers somewhere and says, well, our client obviously had his heart attack or cancer because of this drug, and so give me $50 million. I mean, if Glaxo takes a $7 billion hit on Avandia for diabetes because some smidgen of the population winds up with a heart attack, we can talk about that smidgen of the population later, but How many more diabetes drugs are they going to make? The answer, none. Of course not. You wouldn't either. You got a background in business. You wouldn't tell somebody to walk into a buzzsaw like that.
No, I wouldn't. So do we improve healthcare by by doing tort reform first?
I think we do both. I think you got to, at the same moment, you got to say, listen, we're going to create different categories of drugs for consumers to use through the FDA. We're also just going to eliminate the way the FDA treats drugs. Now, you say, well, Jim, how could you do that? Well, we did it in the internet. The internet 15, 20 years ago was consciously created by the government as a haven from sales taxes, from most regulations, the copyright laws. If Google or YouTube or whoever puts up a copyrighted piece of material, a country song from Nashville, and the copyright owner says, well, gee, I don't really appreciate you using my song on your thing for free, they can communicate to Google, write them a letter and say, take it down, and Google will. That's the deal. But you can't sue. And I mean, if Google and YouTube had gotten sued the way the pharmaceutical companies get sued, or any medical entrepreneur gets sued, it wouldn't exist. We wouldn't have an internet. We wouldn't have search engines. We wouldn't have this trillion-dollar industry in Silicon Valley. It was a conscious choice to shield them from this. So I think that's not only the FDA, not only the trialers, which I think is just that alone, and I think in addition, you need a political system that says that the central issue we face in healthcare is not managing, financing, and accounting for illness. You get sick now, who pays for it? Does Barack Obama pay for it, or does Paul Ryan pay for it? That's really not the question that you'd like to see answered first and foremost.
Well, a lot of people think that one of the things that's wrong with our healthcare system is that I don't pay for it, and so therefore I'm not very concerned about how much I'm spending. For example, I just had a hip replaced. I didn't know what it was going to cost. All I had to know was insurance had approved it. I didn't need to shop around for the best deal or for the best price. Didn't care. So is that another thing that's wrong with our healthcare system?
Small, to be honest. I mean, Kenneth Arrow, liberal economist, won a Nobel Prize 40 years ago, in part for figuring out that healthcare is not really a free market. That the gradient between you, the patient, and the doctor or the hospital or the oncologist is so steep, you'll never figure out what they're talking about. If they, I mean, some surgeries like LASIK, for example, maybe even knee replacement, maybe even hip replacement, you can shop around. You can Google from here to this hospital for special surgery in New York and make a choice where you want to go. But if you walk in with a sick child, you walk in with a cancer diagnosis, you're not going to say, listen, I appreciate what you said about my child with a head wound, but I'm going to go shop around a little bit and see if Walmart has a better deal. It just isn't the way it works. This stuff is complicated. And furthermore, if you walk into any doctor in the world and say, I've got Alzheimer's, or I think I've got Alzheimer's, there's nothing they can do for you. Shopping around has a value, but in a relatively narrow field. My mother is, bless her heart, is 78 years old. Honest to God, I don't really want her getting 50 pitches from health insurers saying we've got some new Medicare plan for you, and sign up here. I don't know what she'll be getting. And and I think most people above a certain age don't really want to be confronted with a bunch of salesmen on their lives.
Well, I would agree with that. Let me go back to my original question: what's wrong with U.S. healthcare? I think most people are generally aware that we spend more per capita on health care in the United States than any other Western nation. And yet when you look at the efficacy of our care, that is the effectiveness of what we get for our money, we rank way down the list, at least beyond the top 10.
Right.
So there's clearly a mismatch there. There's a disconnect. What is wrong that's causing that situation?
We have a population. I mean, first of all, these comparisons all mostly go to Europe and Asia. And so we have a population that is demographically different than Europe. We have a population with a lot more guns, a lot more drugs. We have a lot more hard cases, if you will, than they do. But I have to say that that line of thought begins with the premise we're spending too much in healthcare. Who says? Where was it written that 17% of GDP was too much for healthcare? Healthcare is what economists call it.
Well, I think the answer to that is if you live in another country and 15% is spent or 12% of GDP is spent and the expectancy of life is longer, then there's
Well,
an assumption that there's better health care.
There is an assumption, but I'm
money.
saying that might not be correct. If you're in Japan and you eat fish all your life as opposed to hamburgers and French fries, that may well be the biggest single variable. If you smoke, you know, you know, there's a million variables. Nobody is in favor of waste. However, I think the politics have taught us that every earnest reformer who says, I'm going to remanage care better and so on, and you know, set up this and that and whatever, tends to get voted out of office because it ultimately means cuts. The public does not really see the distinction between managing healthcare better with an eye towards saving money and rationing. They just don't. And I think that's because the same sentiment animates both thoughts. The same people who want to manage healthcare better also tend to want to ration, including the private sector. The private sector is just as capable of making tough choices on people as the public sector is. This is America. We make a lot of choices in this country. We've done a lot of things right. We've done a lot of things wrong. This is the country we live in. And another way of thinking about it is to say, listen, obviously Americans are obsessed with health. They want to go to the doctor. They want to get better. You know, so now maybe we think of that as an asset rather than a liability. Instead of trying to convince them, which by the way you won't, oh, see the doctor less. You know, we're not going to do as many tests on you. We'll practice less defensive medicine. Well, actually, you know, it's very hard to convince a patient who can't figure out what's wrong to think that way. What if we said, listen, the problem that we have with healthcare, and the reason it's so expensive, is that it's labor intensive and frankly not very good relative to the problems. If you have to go to the doctor and they have to do 100 tests on you because they just don't have the diagnostic equipment to figure out what's wrong with you, then they're going to spend a lot of time and effort poking you and so on until they figure it out. If instead we say, listen, could the same big data operations that now make Facebook and Google and Amazon and you know whoever else so effective, could we, in my case, could we take an inventory of every 54-year-old male in the country, especially you know, height, weight, anything you want to measure in, and say, Mr. Pinkerton, if that pain in your elbow is most likely X as opposed to Y, would that be useful? And I say, well, listen, I want to be healthy. I'm conscious of my rights to be healthy. I'm willing to spend money on my health, but I'm certainly grateful if somebody can use you know new technology to make it a cheaper experience. What I'm not really interested in is some bureaucrat somewhere, whether it's public or private, telling me, well, listen, we've decided no prostate cancer tests for you until you're 50. You know, you might think you knew somebody who had prostate cancer at 41. Well, tough. You wait till you're 50. No, that won't happen in this country. So the elites, if the elites are as smart as they think they are, they'd be saying, okay, every now and then, you know, you learn this in business. The customer's always right. Mr. Customer, what do you want? Now, what do you want? That's interesting. We can help you with that. By the way, you got to pay. And that's what people will do. People, you know, Steve Jobs died tragically of cancer in his 50s with $10 billion in the bank. Now that's what a mismatched portfolio that was, right? And be cold about it. Surely a greater investment in cancer would have yielded great returns not only to Steve Jobs and his family, but all the rest of us who enjoy that kind of innovation and hate to see that kind of human capital be lost at a relatively young age.
Well, not to defend or criticize, but as I understand that situation, he made a very conscious decision to delay treatment in favor of seeking holistic treatments, and medical science perhaps could have made a difference in his case had it been allowed to intervene.
Entirely possible, but we all make mistakes, we all do dumb things, and
Sure.
we're all willing to pay. Look, this is America. We want to eat a lot and then take a pill and get thin.
Sure.
Is that so bad?
Sure. Well, you picked up your iPhone a moment ago and you referred to technology. A lot of people would say that one of the things that's wrong with U.S. healthcare is that it's been very slow to adopt the technology that has swept every other industry in America. I'll tell you a very quick story and then I'll let you respond to this. Yesterday morning, for example, I went to my dermatologist for my regular 6-month checkup. He has just moved into beautiful new offices. He actually built a building. I'm sure the building must have cost $4 or $5 million. As soon as I walked into these lavish, beautiful new offices, I was handed a clipboard with a piece of paper on it, and I had to fill out all the information that I've been filling out every 6 months for the last 5 years. I went into an examining room, took that clipboard with that piece of paper, and the nurse went through on the computer and answered the questions on the computer after I had written them down on a piece of paper. I could have done it online. She could have done it. Why is it that medicine in the United States is so slow to adopt technology?
I think the biggest single reason is trial errors. I think that, look, the moment that John Edwards figures out that all the medical information of every dermatology patient in the country is online somewhere, and so that every time somebody goes to a dermatologist and says, look, this treatment didn't work for me, John Edwards' paralegal says, well, there's a lawsuit right there. I mean, I've got a group, a pool of 5 million people, whatever the number is, 2 million people, 10 million, 100 million people, and so on. And so the doctors say to themselves, listen, if I'd be idiotic to unsilo my information. And same thing with a hospital, same thing with any medical institution, same thing with any pharmaceutical company. The moment that I'm fully transparent and open source, as I should be, as I said before, I would be healthier if every 54-year-old had a database, but I'd have to contribute my information the way, for example, the airlines contribute their information. Every airline sends all the flight data safety information to the FAA. The FAA takes it all and says, listen, we've now figured out that if an airplane takes off and lands X number of times, the tires will fail. So we now make them rotate the tires out before that, or the wings crack. Or
so why doesn't John Edwards use that data to create
because
all kinds of class
the
action
FAA
suits?
has said, as a matter of policy, the FAA anonymizes it. That's just a policy choice.
And why could we not do that with healthcare?
Because nobody wants to, seemingly. I think truly nobody's addressed. I mean, again, you could look at the entire healthcare debate going back to the Clinton-Gingrich fight of the early 90s and the Obama-John Boehner fight of the last 2 years, and these words concerning research, medicine, cures, technologies just aren't part of it. It's all been insurance.
Well, it makes no sense not to want to fix the problem because, again, we come back to spending 20% of our GDP. We spend more per capita than any other Western nation. That's insanity when we project out 10 or 15 or 20 years down the road. And people of my age, I'm 61, one of these days, Lord willing, I'll be 81. Most of the healthcare expenditures in America are spent in the last 6 months of life. There's this huge bulge of people coming into that era.
You're right. We have to invent our way out of this crisis. We're not going to regulate and bureaucrat and, to be crude about it, death panelize. Look, this whole rationing thing, when the conservatives said that the Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, whatever you want to call it, is a death panel, they weren't wrong. It's going on in Europe all the time. It's standard in Europe. Open up any British or Dutch or newspaper, and there's articles all the time. It's sort of this quiet practice of their health systems. And it's one thing if it's a quiet private decision between the family and the patient. Okay, that happens. But it's another thing when it turns into a bureaucracy, when you have the post office running it. I mean, that's just catastrophic. And you're right, we probably do spend too much on the elderly, but the irony is we spend all this money on the elderly to not help them. If you or I get diagnosed with Alzheimer's, we'll spend more than we ever paid in taxes, quite likely, on our 24/7 dementia care with no hope or chance or prospect that not only will we get better, but that the experience of us going through that kind of horrible decline for X number of years will even benefit anybody. Each case is its own isolated little dead end, as it were, because there is no data system. Again, the advances in technology, going back to this, that have transformed e-commerce and
every other industry.
Just about every other industry, and are going to change, everything from transportation to education and so on. The kind of, probably familiar with the Khan Academy, this online education.
Right.
That's free.
Right.
You could get a pretty darn good education for free by going to khanacademy.org. Okay, so how about 100% cost crash in education? Is that tempting to budgeteers and people who worry about the GDP? Of course it is. Are we doing that for healthcare? No, because the mavens who control the healthcare debate say the only issues that matter. I mean, Joe Biden on Face the Nation the other day said there's nothing worse than having a sick kid, no health insurance. Actually, there is. Having a sick kid with no cure. That's really worse. And one way or another in this country. And by the way, since 1986, We've had a kind of primitive form of national health insurance. President Reagan signed the Emergency Treatment and Labor Act of 1986, which says that if you show up in a hospital emergency room, they have to treat you. This is a rather inefficient way to do things. However, it guarantees that nobody, homeless, illegal alien, anybody, no matter what sort of unfortunate category you could pick, they're all going to get some level of treatment. So that's not the issue. The issue is, if you get a spinal cord injury, do they have a treatment for it or not? And right now they don't.
And yet my thoughts go back to the early 1960s when President Kennedy said, we can put a man on the moon. And so this country mobilized, and to go back to your comments about the FDA, the president's dictate to NASA was, don't tell me why we can't do it, tell me yes. And so we let nothing stop us. We let nothing stand in our way. So you're saying that if we had the same national mobilization to create health and solutions for disease, we would fix the cost problem.
I think so. I think the history of the space project, the Apollo program, under Presidents Kennedy and Johnson and Nixon is certainly a great example of that. I think building the atomic bomb was pretty good. I think that all sorts of mobilization efforts in World War II were pretty good. I think the creation of the internet was pretty good. And people say, well, there's too many bureaucrats, too much big government. The government of 2012 is not the competent entity that it was in 1942, and they're probably right. Okay, create a new entity. But the issue is not whether it's bureaucrats or the military is doing it. The issue is, are competent, motivated people allowed the freedom and the entrepreneurial fizz, plus whatever else it takes in terms of keeping the trial lawyers and the bureaucrats away, to do it. The challenge is, right now, if you're a medical entrepreneur and you say, well, where's the way, how can I make the most money in this field? Forget idealism for a moment, just pure most money. You say, oh, well, Viagra 2.0, Botox 3.0, Latex for your eyelashes. That's where the real money is. And that's, the free market is not necessarily what the country needs right now. And if President Obama and Speaker Boehner and Majority Leader Reid got up tomorrow and said, we care so much about Alzheimer's, cancer, wounded warriors, or all of the above, diabetes, all of the above, that we're going to create an X Prize. We're going to, we found Bill Gates to give, $1 billion to say, if you cure Alzheimer's, you do this. We've created an enterprise zone. So maybe here in Tennessee, we've created an enterprise zone. No trial lawyers, no bureaucrats, no taxes. Maybe we've even floated some bonds. This is, if you went to the life insurers and said, if everybody lived 5 years longer because they didn't die of Alzheimer's or whatever it might be, that's 5 years later, you don't have to pay your premiums to them, right? That's good news. So how much of that, I think off the top of my head, life insurance death benefits are about $500 billion a year. So if you could push that back, even by 10%, $50 billion right there, would the Hartford and whoever else say, well, gee, we'll chip in that. Maybe not necessarily give money, but we'll be part of the reward. Who knows? Create, you've got a financial background. You could figure out how to do this and create some bond that says, if this happens, there's a huge balloon benefit to whoever does it and things like that. Then you go back to every entrepreneur, every inventor, every medical visionary, everybody who's saying, listen, you're a really smart guy. Right now, your plan is to take your 200 IQ and go to Goldman Sachs or go to Facebook. We're telling you, stay here in medical enterprise land and be part of the data crunching operation that says we're going to just do this at the speed of Moore's law and do it instead. I think that's what I'm really talking about is leadership, which President Roosevelt had for the Manhattan Project, however secretly. President Kennedy had visibly for the moon program. President Lincoln had it for the Transcontinental Railroad in the middle of the Civil War. They said, we got to build this, is so vital to the future of the country, we got to do this. 100 other projects you can think of. I think, why wouldn't we want to duplicate one of those?
Well, you've got some fascinating ideas, and I'll look forward to hearing you talk more about those concepts on the Fox News channel as a regular contributor to the Fox News Watch show. I believe that airs every week. Is that right?
1:30 and 10:30 Central Time on Saturdays.
Well, we'll be watching for that. We appreciate Jim Pinkerton coming to the Lipscomb campus and being a part of the Don Elliott Lecture Series. He'll be speaking tonight at a dinner as part of that lecture series, and it's been an honor to have you as a guest on this program, Jim. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Attorney.
We're delighted to have you. My guest today has been Jim Pinkerton, who is a contributor to the Fox News channel. He's a former senior research fellow at the American Strategy Program, among many other qualifications. Thank you for joining us. We'll look forward to seeing you again soon on Conversations with the Dean.